They said the prairie keeps more secrets than graves, and on the morning Maeve hail was traded, the wind carried shame like wet hay. The hook is simple: a mother with hollowed cheeks, a swollen daughter, and a giant cowboy stepping out of dust to make an offer no one honest should accept. Maeve was large in a town that measured worth by the angle of a jaw. She carried the baby like a secret drumbeat beneath her ribs, a sound that made her posture both stubborn and soft. Ruth, her mother, had hands that had mended shirts and counted hens. Those hands had decided the accounts came before mercy. "A cow will keep us through winter," she said, voice thin as paper. Barter was the law of small places where coin was scarce and hunger persuasive. Jonah Rees arrived like a slow-weathered thing, taller than most doorframes, broad as a barn, with a silence that held more than speech. He needed a housekeeper and someone to keep the hearth. The town needed an answer to its gossip. The deal read like a ledger: entry $200 and a brindled cow for Maeve's labor and present signed. Because signatures make bargains seem right. Maeve signed because the baby's kicks were louder than shame, and because a roof, however cold, was better than the street. Inside Jonah's homestead, the rooms smelled of wood smoke and solitude. He kept his distance at first, courtesy and caution, braided together, while Maeve learned the groove of pans and the pulse of the hearth. She hummed low hymns to the child. He listened, noting how she could soothe a cow or mend a harness in lamplight. Respect grew not from pity but from work observed. Her hands were steady, her voice steadying. The bargain's shape began to blur at the edges. Conflict arrives soft. Ruth visits with accounting eyes. Townsfolk point in thin, embarrassed ways. Little Cloud, Nakota's niece, leaves bread and watches with curious kinship. Nakota himself, old as the hills and sharp as flint, speaks bluntly. "They traded you, as if you were a plow. By your own ground, daughter." His teaching of the land becomes Maeve's refuge. She learns to read whether and where raspberries hide. Knowledge tastes like freedom. Jonah battles his own conscience. He'd known loneliness as a man knows winter. A bargain was business, but a household is different. He sees Maeve with the cow he paid for, feeling admiration wedge into something without name. Maeve hides a tin shard in her hemknot for violence, but to Mark she isn't merely a thing. The first part builds to a storm. Rumors of the Daly brothers, hoofprints at a torn gate, and Jonah riding into white to check fences. Maeve watches him go, hands on her belly, hope and fear knotted together. Being traded for a cow did not erase her courage. It forced its shape. Bargains carved by desperation can become shelter if courage and small acts of care reshape them. Evenings at the Rees homestead teach another lesson. Survival is practical, and intimacy can begin in the sharing of chores. The storm will come, and when it does, the ledger and the cow might mean nothing compared to who stands by the door. Maeve, once measured by gossip and size, begins to learn how to make a place that might one day be called home. The thaw came early that year, loosening the ice on the river and the tightness in Maeve's chest. Mud replaced snow, and with it came the town's shifting opinions, some softer, some sharper. The Daly brothers had stolen livestock from neighboring ranches, and every whisper carried their name like a curse. The Rees homestead was quiet, but danger felt close enough to taste. Like iron on the tongue, Jonah returned from checking distant fences with bruises on his shoulder and a grim set to his jaw. He said little, but Maeve read more in his silence than in words. She boiled herbs Nakota had given her, pressed warm cloth to his. Spring came with the smell of damp soil and wild mint, carrying the promise of new beginnings. After the canyon fight, the town walked softer around Jonah and Maeve, as if danger had taught everyone what truly mattered. Even the breeze over the prairie felt changed gentler, though still edged with the wildness of the frontier. Maeve's belly had grown heavy, the child shifting with steady strength. Each movement reminded her that a new life was near, and with it, a reckoning. She spent her mornings sorting herbs from Nakota, boiling water for poultices, and stitching tiny clothes from scraps of linen. Jonah watched her sometimes with quiet awe, as if he hadn't yet figured out how someone overlooked for so long could hold so much power in her hands. One evening, Jonah confessed something he'd kept buried. He spoke of a woman he once loved, who'd left him for a traveling preacher with hollow promises. The abandonment had carved a deep silence in him, making him wary of binding himself to anyone. "But with you," he said softly, "the quiet feels different. Not empty, steady." Maeve didn't answer. She pressed her palm to her belly instead, letting the child's kick speak for her. Still, not all hearts heal in straight lines. Ruth returned to the ranch when word of the child spread. Guilt lined her face deeper than age. She brought blankets, food, and apologies that tangled between her teeth. "I made a choice to save us," she whispered, "but I didn't see what it cost you." Maeve listened, but forgiveness is slow work. It grows like prairie grass only after the fire. A new threat emerged when the bounty hunter Garrett returned. He'd lost the Daly's trail and believed they were hiding close to Harrison's Bend. He warned Jonah that outlaws with wounded pride often strike last and hardest. Jonah's instincts sharpened. He strengthened fences, reinforced the barn, and kept his rifle within reach. Through it all, Maeve felt the tension like storm static. She wanted peace for their child, but the frontier rarely granted it freely. When labor began, it came like a sudden summer storm, hard, fast, and relentless. The house filled with the sounds of pain and prayer. Little Cloud and Nakota arrived swiftly, bringing herbs and steady hands. Jonah stayed outside at first, pacing the yard, breath tight as wire. But Maeve called for him, her voice thin but determined. "I won't do this alone," she said. Jonah knelt beside her, holding her hand as each wave of pain broke through. His large calloused fingers trembled against hers. The hours stretched long, sweat and tears mixing with whispered encouragements. Then, with one final push and a cry that seemed to crack the world open, the child arrived small, warm, alive. A daughter. Jonah wept openly, a man unashamed to break. Maeve looked at her child and felt something inside her settle. A piece of herself returning home. The town gathered the next day, offering gift spread, quilts, carved toys. Even the sheriff came with a shy smile, promising extra watchfulness should the Dalys return. The Reese homestead felt full, fuller than Maeve had ever known. In that soft, golden afternoon, Jonah asked again, not as a bargain, not as protection, but as a man offering his whole heart. "Take my name," he said, voice warm. "Not because of what happened, because of what we're building." Maeve looked at her daughter, her home, the wide land that had taught her resilience. She finally felt ready to choose her own place in the world, and this time, the choice would be hers. Summer settled over the prairie in long waves of heat, the kind that made the air shimmer above the grass. Maeve moved through the Reese homestead with her daughter tied to her chest, humming low songs that kept the baby calm. Jonah worked nearby, always within earshot, as if fatherhood had softened the hard lines of his life. For a little while, peace held fragile but real. But peace on the frontier never stayed long. Rumors drifted in from the wagon trails. The surviving Daly brothers had been seen heading north, bruised, angry, and hunting for revenge. Bounty hunter Garrett returned with grim confirmation they believed Jonah was the reason their kin lay dead in the canyon. The Dalys had lost cattle, pride, and blood, and men like them did not forget humiliation. Jonah fortified